Edgar Allan Poe remains one of the most mysterious and influential figures in the history of literature. Known for his haunting poetry, chilling stories, and groundbreaking detective fiction, Poe lived a life filled with tragedy, hardship, and emotional turmoil. The darkness that surrounded his personal life often found its way into his writing, creating works that still captivate readers more than a century later. Even the circumstances of his death remain shrouded in mystery, adding another layer of intrigue to the legacy of Edgar Allan Poe. Edgar Allan Poe was born on January 19, 1809, in Boston. His parents, Elizabeth Arnold Hopkins Poe and David Poe Jr., were traveling actors who struggled to make a stable living. Unfortunately, Poe's childhood began with heartbreak. His father abandoned the family when Edgar was still very young, leaving his mother to raise him and his siblings alone. Not long after, tragedy struck again when his mother died of illness in 1811. At only 2 years old, Edgar Allan Poe was left orphaned, a traumatic beginning that would influence his outlook on life and literature for years to come. After his mother's death, Poe was taken in by a wealthy merchant named John Allan and his wife, Frances Allan, in Richmond. Although they never legally adopted him, Poe was raised in their household and took the middle name Allan. Frances Allan cared deeply for Poe and treated him with kindness and affection. However, Poe's relationship with John Allan was complicated and often tense. John Allan was a practical businessman who expected discipline and responsibility, while Poe showed a strong interest in literature, poetry, and imagination. Their personalities frequently clashed, and the tension between them would continue throughout Poe's life. As a young boy, Poe traveled with the Allan family to London, where he attended school for several years. During this time, he received a classical education and developed a love for languages and literature. When the family returned to Richmond, Poe continued his studies and proved to be an intelligent and talented student. By his teenage years, he had already begun writing poetry, showing early signs of the creativity that would later make him famous. In 1826, Poe enrolled at the University of Virginia. He excelled academically, particularly in languages such as French and Latin. However, his time at the university was short-lived. John Allan provided him with very limited financial support, which forced Poe into difficult circumstances. To cope with his financial problems, Poe began gambling, hoping to win enough money to cover his expenses. Unfortunately, this only made his situation worse, leaving him with heavy debts. After less than a year, Poe was forced to leave the university due to financial difficulties and growing conflict with John Allan. Feeling frustrated and abandoned, Poe moved to Boston in 1827. There he published his first collection of poetry, titled Tamerlane and Other Poems. The book was released anonymously and received very little attention, selling only a few copies. Struggling financially and unable to support himself through writing alone, Poe made the difficult decision to enlist in the United States Army. To hide his identity from John Allan, he enlisted under the name Edgar A. Perry. Poe performed well in the army and quickly rose through the ranks. However, during this time he received devastating news. His foster mother, Frances Allan, had fallen seriously ill. By the time Poe returned home, she had already passed away in 1829. Her death deeply affected him, as she had been the only consistent source of love and support in his life. After leaving the army, Poe attempted to reconcile with John Allen, who helped him gain admission to the United States Military Academy at West Point. Poe soon realized that military life was not suited to his personality or ambitions. Discipline and strict rules frustrated him, and he had little interest in becoming a career officer. Determined to leave the academy, he intentionally neglected his duties until he was court-martialed and expelled in 1831. Although this decision angered John Allen and ended their relationship permanently, it allowed Poe to pursue his true passion, writing. Following his departure from West Point, Poe moved to New York City, where he published another collection titled Poems. Around this time, he also began writing short stories and literary criticism in order to earn a living. Poe's writing style was unique and often focused on themes of death, madness, grief, and the darker side of the human mind. These themes would later become the defining characteristics of his literary legacy. Poe eventually moved to Baltimore, where he lived with his aunt, Maria Clem, and her young daughter, Virginia Clem. In 1835, Poe married Virginia, who was only 13 years old at the time. Although the marriage has often been viewed as controversial by modern standards, many historians believe their relationship was loving and supportive. Virginia became a source of emotional comfort for Poe during some of the most difficult periods of his life. During the 1830s and 1840s, Poe began to establish himself as a professional writer and editor. He worked for several literary magazines, including the Southern Literary Messenger, where his sharp literary criticism gained widespread attention. Poe was known for his honesty and often harsh reviews, which earned him both respect and enemies in the literary world. Despite his growing reputation, he struggled constantly with financial instability. In 1839, Poe published Tales of the Grotesque and Arabesque, a collection of short stories that showcased his talent for horror and psychological storytelling. Stories such as The Fall of the House of Usher demonstrated his ability to create an atmosphere of suspense and dread. Poe's works explored fear, guilt, and the fragile nature of the human mind, themes that would later influence many writers of Gothic and horror literature. Poe also played a crucial role in the development of detective fiction. In 1841, he published The Murders in the Rue Morgue, widely considered the first modern detective story. The tale introduced the brilliant fictional detective C. Auguste Dupin, whose method of logical reasoning helped solve seemingly impossible crimes. This character later inspired famous detectives such as Sherlock Holmes, created by Arthur Conan Doyle. Despite his success in short stories, Poe achieved widespread fame in 1845 when he published his famous poem, The Raven. The poem tells the story of a grieving man visited by a mysterious raven that repeatedly speaks the word nevermore. The poem's haunting rhythm and emotional intensity captured the imagination of readers across America. Overnight, Poe became one of the most recognized poets in the country. However, even this success did not bring him lasting financial security. While Poe's career was improving, tragedy once again struck his personal life. Virginia had been suffering from tuberculosis for several years, and her health gradually worsened. Poe watched helplessly as his young wife became weaker and weaker. In 1847, Virginia died at the age of 24. Her death devastated Poe emotionally and pushed him into a period of deep depression. In the years following Virginia's death, Poe struggled with loneliness, poor health, and worsening financial problems. He attempted to rebuild his life and even considered remarrying, but none of his relationships lasted. His behavior became increasingly unpredictable, and he often battled with alcohol addiction. Despite these struggles, he continued to write poetry, essays, and lectures. One of Poe's most important literary essays was The Philosophy of Composition, in which he explained how he carefully constructed the raven. In the essay, Poe argued that every element of a poem should contribute to a single emotional effect. This theory demonstrated his deep understanding of literary technique and continues to influence writers and critics today.
In October 1849, Poe's life came to a sudden and mysterious end. On October 3rd, he was found wandering the streets of Baltimore in a confused and distressed state. He was wearing clothes that did not belong to him and appeared unable to explain what had happened. Poe was taken to Washington College Hospital, where his condition worsened over the next few days. On October 7, 1849, Edgar Allan Poe died at the age of 40. The exact cause of his death has never been definitively determined. Some historians believe alcohol poisoning played a role, while others suggest illness, rabies, or even a practice known as cooping, a form of election fraud in which victims were forced to vote multiple times while intoxicated. Because no clear medical records remain, the true cause of Poe's death remains one of literature's greatest mysteries. Despite the tragedies of his life, Edgar Allan Poe left behind a powerful and lasting legacy. His work helped shape the genres of horror, Gothic fiction, and detective stories. His influence can be seen in the writings of authors such as H.P. Lovecraft and Stephen King. Poe's exploration of psychological fear and emotional suffering opened new possibilities for storytelling and inspired generations of writers. Today, Poe is remembered not only for his dark and imaginative tales, but also for his ability to transform personal pain into artistic beauty. His stories continue to fascinate readers around the world, and his poems remain some of the most haunting works ever written. Though his life was filled with sorrow and uncertainty, the voice of Edgar Allan Poe continues to echo through literature, reminding us that even in darkness, creativity can endure.